to YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Welcome, everyone. So, we are actually on time tonight. I'm so surprised that I'm on time. Um, so, I have a couple things to explain tonight. I'm trying to get all my links up here for you. Hang on just a second. Should be not. Hang on just a second. I'm trying to get my notifications to not ding you to death. Okay. All right. Um, as soon as I get my links up, we can get started here. And I will explain one of them. Okay, so it just occurred to me that I may not have ever explained links here. So we're still doing summer reading. The store is up and running. I've got new stuff in both stores. I have the bookstore, and then I have the estate finds store, which is also on eBay. I also have biblio.com, so you can just search for rare and antiquarian bookfinders, and we should pop up on Biblio. And the new edition, so the 3 links that I have are on Restream. Now you guys have my link on my bio on Instagram. But these guys do not unless I put it there. So anyway, on here in the side part that you guys can see, there's 3 links. The top one is the bookstore. The bottom one is the estate find store, which is collectibles, things that I find with books. And the second link is Buy Me a Coffee, which is a way to tip content creators if you like their content. Or in my case, I'm paying for Restream to do this, so anything is appreciated to help pay for that, because that's a monthly cost, and they are not cheap, by the way. But I feel like it's the best one out of everybody, and I can get the most bang out of my buck because there's a lot of different social media platforms that I can simultaneously broadcast to. So I have 4 on here, and then I have Instagram on my phone over here. But eventually, I would like to merge everything together, and which will make me, like they charge you more if you have more platforms. So it's just a matter of how far you can reach your audience, and how many people you can reach and that kind of thing. So that being said, so I do summer reading every summer. Just a little bit about what I do. I do on here. I do during the Christmas season. I do updates. We do chatting, live chatting. Any questions anybody wants, to ask me, and that kind of thing. So I'm on here every week, all year long, usually, unless we're on vacation or somebody's sick, or stuff like life things. But most of the time, I am here every Monday. And in the winter, I do some readings after Christmas. Sometimes we do, um, you know, different little things that we think up, or somebody will come and be my guest, that type of thing. So So all that to be said is it just takes money to get Restream going and that kind of thing, like everything else nowadays. So, and I'm not here to ask for anything. It's totally volunteer. Like I don't expect anybody to do anything as far as that goes. But so anyway, I just wanted to explain what that was because this is the first night I've had it up. So as a link. So we are reading Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie. For those of you that are new, and I am on chapter 7. I tried to get through 2 chapters, and I did one night, but then the chapters have been too long to read 2 at a time. So right now I'm doing 1 at a time. But if they get a little shorter, I might do 2 at a time. But this looks like it's probably well, I might be able to squeeze 2 chapters in. These aren't quite as long. Chapter 6 was long for some reason. I don't know why. All right, well, we'll get started. So for those of you that don't know about Death on the Nile, this is a Hercule Poirot book, one of the many. I think there were like 30-something of them or something. She did a lot of Hercule Poirot. And this is about 2 characters, the 2 main characters, which are girlfriends and friends, and the one friend takes the boyfriend of the one and marries him. And so this is the main plot twist, I guess, as anything. And they are on their honeymoon, and they are being stalked by the ex-girlfriend and the ex-friend, which is, it's kind of a big deal. So anyway, that's where we're at with the whole thing. And Hercule Poirot is on the same Egyptian trip up the Nile on the same boat and that kind of thing. So that's where we're at with it. Hi, Catherine, and thank you for joining. So I'm going to go ahead and start reading. I have my cup of hot tea here so I don't get all croaky and everything like that. Mrs. Allerton, looking quiet and distinguished in her simple black lace evening gown, descended 2 decks to the dining room. At the door of it, her son caught her up. Sorry, darling, I thought I was going to be late. I wonder where we sit. The saloon was dotted with little tables. Mrs. Allerton paused till the steward, who was busy seating a party of people, could attend to them. By the way, she added, I asked little Hercule Poirot to sit at our table. Mother, you didn't. Tim sounded really taken aback and annoyed. His mother stared at him in surprise. Tim was usually so easygoing. My dear, do you mind? Yes, I do. He's an unmitigated little bounder. Oh, no, Tim, I don't agree with you. Anyway, what do we want to get mixed up with an outsider for? Cooped up like this on a small boat, that sort of thing is always a bore. He'll be with us morning, noon, and night. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, dear. Mrs. Allerton looked distressed. I thought really it would amuse you. After all, he must have had a varied experience, and you love detective stories. Tim grunted. I wish you wouldn't have these bright ideas, Mother. We can't get out of it now, I suppose. Really, Tim, I don't see how we can. Oh well, we shall have to put up with it, I suppose. The steward came to them at this moment and led them to a table. Mrs. Allerton's face wore a rather puzzled expression as she followed him. Tim was usually so easy-going and good-tempered. This outburst was quite unlike him. It wasn't as though he had the ordinary Britisher's dislike and mistrust of foreigners. Tim was very cosmopolitan. Oh well, she sighed. Men were incomprehensible. Even one's nearest and dearest had unsuspected reactions and feelings. As they took their places, Hercule Poirot came quickly and silently into the dining saloon. He paused with his hand on the back of the third chair. You really permit, madame, that I avail myself of your kind suggestion. Of course, sit down, Mr. Poirot. You are most amiable. She was uneasily conscious that, as he seated himself, he shot a swift glance at Tim, and that Tim had not quite succeeded in masking a somewhat sullen expression. Mrs. Allerton set herself to produce a pleasant atmosphere. As they drank their soup, she picked up the passenger list which had been placed beside her plate. Let's try and identify everybody, she suggested cheerfully. I always think that's rather fun. She began reading. Mrs. Allerton, Mr. T. Allerton. That's easy enough. Miss de Belfort. They've put her at the same table as the Otterborns. I see. I wonder what she and Rosalie will make of each other. Who comes next? Mr. Bessner? Dr. Bessner? Who can identify Dr. Bessner? She bent her glance on a table at which four men sat together. I think he must be the fat one with the closely shaved head and the mustache. A German, I should imagine. He seems to be enjoying his soup very much. Certain succulent noises floated across to them. Mrs. Allerton continued, Miss Bowers? Can we make us guess at Miss Bowers? There are 3 or 4 women. No, we'll leave her for the present. Mr. and Mrs. Doyle, yes, indeed, the lions of this trip. She she really is very beautiful, and what a perfectly lovely frock she is wearing. Tim turned around in his chair. Lynette and her husband and Andrew Pennington had been given a table in the corner. Lynette was wearing a white dress and pearls. It looks frightfully simple to me, said Tim. Just a length of stuff with a kind of cord around it, around the middle. Yes, darling, said his mother. A very nice manly description of an 80 guinea model. I can't think why women pay so much for their clothes, Tim said. It seems absurd to me. Mrs. Allerton proceeded with her study of her fellow passengers. Mrs. Fanthorpe must be the one of the 4 at that table, the intensely quiet young man who never speaks, rather a nice face, cautious but intelligent. Perrault agreed. He is intelligent, yes. He does not talk, but he listens very attentively. And he also watches. Yes, he makes good use of those eyes. Not quite the type you would expect to find traveling for pleasure in this part of the world. I wonder what he is doing here. Mr. Fergusson, read Mrs. Allerton. I feel that Fergusson must be our anti-capitalist friend. Miss Otterborn. We know all about them. Mr. Pennington, alias Uncle Andrew. He's a good-looking man, I think. Now, mother, said Tim, I think he's very good-looking in a dry sort of way, said Mrs. Allerton. Rather a ruthless jaw. Probably the kind of man one reads about in the paper who operates on Wall Street, or is it in Wall Street? I'm sure he must be extremely rich. Next, Mr. Hercule Poirot, whose talents are really being wasted. Can't you get up a crime for Mr. Poirot, Tim? But her well-meant banter only seemed to annoy her son anew. He scowled, and Mrs. Allerton hurried on. Mr. Ricchetti, our Italian archaeological friend, the then Miss Robson, or Robeson, I'm not sure, and last of all, Miss Van Schuyler. The last's easy, the very ugly old American lady who obviously feels herself the queen of the boat and who is clearly going to be very exclusive and speak to nobody who doesn't come up on to the most exciting standards. She's rather marvelous, isn't she, really? A kind of period piece. The two women with her must be Miss Bowers and Miss Robson. Perhaps a secretary, the thin one with pince nez, and a poor relation, the rather pathetic young woman who is obviously enjoying herself in spite of being treated like a black slave. I think Robson's the secretary woman and Bowers is the poor relation. Wrong, mother, said Tim, grinning. He said suddenly recovered his good humor. How do you know? Because I was in the lounge before dinner, and the old bean said to the companion woman, "Where's Miss Bowers? Fetch her at once, Cornelia." And away trotted Cornelia like an obedient dog. I shall have to talk to Miss Van Schuyler, mused Mrs. Allerton. Tim grinned again. She'll snub you, mother. Not at all. I shall pave the way by sitting near her and conversing, in low but penetrating, well-bred tones, about any titled relations and foreign friends I can remember. I think a casual mention of your second cousin, once removed, the Duke of Glasgow, would probably do the trick. How unscrupulous you are, mother. Events after dinner were not without their amusing side to a student of human nature, the socialistic young man, who turned out to be Mr. Fergusson as deduced, retired to the smoking room, scorning the assemblage of passengers in the observation saloon on the top deck. Miss Van Schuyler duly secured the best and most undraughty position there by advancing firmly on a table at which Mrs. Otterbourne was sitting and saying, "You'll excuse me, I am sure, but I think my knitting was left here." Fixed by a hypnotic eye, the turban rose and gave ground. I like how they say the turban instead of her name. That's funny. Fixed by, okay, Miss Van Schuyler established herself and her suite. Mrs. Otterbourne sat down nearby and has hazarded various remarks, which were met with such chilling politeness that she soon gave up. Miss Van Schuyler then sat in a glorious isolation. The Doyles sat with the Allertons. Miss Dr. Bessner retained the quiet Mr. Fanthorpe as a companion. Jacqueline de Villefort sat by herself with a book. Rosalie Otterbourne was restless. Mrs. Allerton spoke to her once or twice and tried to draw her into their group, but the girl responded ungraciously. Mr. Hercule Poirot spent his evening listening to an account of Mrs. Otterbourne's mission as a writer. On his way to his cabin that night, he encountered Jacqueline de Belfort. She was leaning over the rail, and as she turned her head, he was struck by the look of acute misery on her face. There was now no insolence. I'm not sure what that word is. Insouciance. Comment if you know what that is. How to say that, I don't know. No malicious defiance, no dark flaming triumph. Good night, mademoiselle. Good night, Mr. Poirot, she hesitated, then said, "You were surprised to find me here?" "I was not so much surprised as sorry, very sorry." He spoke gravely. You mean sorry for me? That is what I meant. You have chosen, mademoiselle, the dangerous course, as we here in this boat have embarked on a journey, so you, too, have embarked on your own private journey. A journey on a swift-moving river between dangerous rocks and heading for who knows what currents of disaster. Why do you say all this? Because it is true. You have cut the bonds that moored you to safety. I doubt now if you could turn back if you would. She said very slowly, That is true. Then she flung her head back. Oh well, one must follow one's star wherever it leads. Beware, mademoiselle, that it is not a false star. She laughed and mimicked the parrot cry of the donkey boys. That very bad star, sir, that star fall down. He was just he was just dropping off to sleep when the murmur of voices awoke him. It was Simon Doyle's voice he heard, repeating the same words he had used when the steamer left Shellal. We've got to go through with it now. Yes, thought Hercule Poirot to himself. We have to go. Oh, excuse me. We have to go through with it now. He was not happy. I think we've got enough time to do chapter 8, hopefully. Um, okay. The steamer arrived early next morning at Es Sabua. Cornelia Robson, her face beaming, a large flapping hat on her head, was one of the first to hurry on shore. Cornelia was not good at snubbing people. She was of an amiable disposition and disposed to like all her fellow creatures. The sight of Hercule Poirot in a white suit, pink shirt, large black bow tie, and a white toupee did not make her wince, as the aristocratic Miss Van Schuyler would assuredly have winced. As they walked together up an avenue of sphinxes, she responded readily to his conventional opening. Your companions are not coming ashore to view the temple? Well, you see, Cousin Marie, that's Miss Van Schuyler, never gets up very early. She has to be very, very careful of her health. And of course she wanted Miss Bowers, that's her hospital nurse, to do things for her. And she said, too, that this isn't one of the best temples, that she was frightfully kind and said it would be quite all right for me to come. That was very gracious of her, said Poirot dryly. The ingenious Cornelia agreed unsuspectingly. Oh, she's very kind. It's simply wonderful of her to bring me on this trip. I do feel I'm a lucky girl. I just could hardly believe it when she suggested to Mother that I should come too. And you have enjoyed it? Yes? Oh, it's been wonderful. I've seen Italy, Venice, and Padua, and Pisa, and then Cairo, and only Cousin Marie wasn't very well in Cairo, so I couldn't get around much there. And now this wonderful trip up to Wadi Halfa, something like that, and back. Perrault said, smiling, You have the happy nature, mademoiselle. He looked thoughtfully from her to the silent, frowning Rosalie, who was walking by herself. She's very nice looking, isn't she? Said Cornelia, following his glance. Only kind of scornful looking. She's very English, of course. She's not as lovely as Mrs. Doyle. I think Mrs. Doyle is the loveliest, the most elegant woman I've ever seen. And her husband just worships the ground she walks on, doesn't he? I think that gray-haired lady is kind of distinguished looking, don't you? She's cousin to a duke, I believe. She was talking about him right near us last night, but she isn't actually titled herself, is she? She prattled on until the dragoman in charge called a halt and began to intone. This temple was dedicated to Egyptian god Ammon and the sun god Herecti, whose symbol was hawk's head. It droned on. Dr. Bessner, Baedeker in hand, mumbled to himself in German. He preferred the written word. Tim Allerton had not joined the party. His mother was breaking the ice with the reserved Mr. Fanthorpe. Andrew Pennington, his arm through Lynette Doyle's, was listening attentively, seemingly most interested in the measurements as recited by the guide. 65 feet high, is that so? Looks a little less to me. Great fellow, this Ramses. The Egyptian live wire, a big businessman, Uncle Andrew. Andrew Pennington looked at her appreciatively. You look fine this morning, Lynette. I've been a mite worried about you lately. You've looked kind of peaky. Chatting together, the party returned to the boat. Once more, the Karnak glided up the river. The scenery was less stern now. There were palms, cultivation. It was as though the change in the scenery had relieved some secret oppression that had brooded over the passengers. Tim Allerton had got over his fit of moodiness. Rosalie looked less sulky, sorry. Lynette seemed almost light-hearted. Pennington said to her, "It's tactless to talk business to a bride on her honeymoon, but there are just one or two things." "Why, of course, Uncle Andrew." Lynette at once became businesslike. "My marriage has made a difference, of course. That's just it. Some time or another I want your signature to several documents." "Why not now?" Andrew Pennington glanced around. Their corner of the observation saloon was quite unintended. Most of the people were outside on the deck space between the observation saloon and the cabins. The only occupants of the saloon were Mr. Ferguson, who was drinking beer at a small table in the middle, his legs encased in their dirty flannel trousers stuck out in front of him, whilst he whistled to himself in the intervals of drinking. Mr. Hercule Poirot was sitting close up to the front glass, intent on the panorama unfolding before him, and Miss Van Schuyler, who was sitting in a corner reading a book on Egypt. "That's fine," said Andrew Pennington. He left the saloon. Lynette and Simon smiled at each other, a slow smile that took a few minutes to come to full fruition. "All right, sweet?" he asked. "Yes, still all right. Funny how I'm not rattled any more," Simon said with a deep conviction in his tone. "You're marvelous." Pennington came back. He thought he brought with him a sheaf of closely written documents. "Mercy," cried Lynette, "have I got to sign all these?" Andrew Pennington was apologetic. "It's tough on you, I know, but I'd just like to get your affairs put in proper shape. First of all, there's the lease of the Fifth Avenue property. Then there are the Western Lands concessions." He talked on, rustling and sorting papers. Simon yawned. The door to the deck swung open, and Mr. Fanthorpe came in. He gazed aimlessly around, then strolled forward and stood by Poirot, looking out at the pale blue water and the yellow enveloping sands. "You sign just here," concluded Pennington, spreading a paper before Lynette and indicating a space. Lynette picked up the document and glanced through it. She turned back once to the first page, then taking up the fountain pen Pennington had laid beside her, she signed her name, Lynette Doyle. Pennington took away the paper and spread out another. Fanthorpe wandered over in their direction. He peered out through the side window at something that seemed to interest him on the bank they were passing. "That's just the transfer," said Pennington. "You needn't read it." But Lynette took a brief glance through it. Pennington laid down a third paper. Again, Lynette perused it carefully. "They're all quite straightforward," said Andrew. "Nothing of interest. Only legal phraseology." Simon yawned again. "My dear girl, you're not going to read the whole lot through, are you? You'll be at it till lunchtime and longer." "I always read everything through," said Lynette. "Father taught me to do that. He said there might be some clerical error." Pennington laughed rather harshly. "You're a grand woman of business, Lynette." "She's much more conscientious than I'd be," said Simon, laughing. "I've never read a legal document in my life. I sign where they tell me to sign on the dotted line, and that's it." "That's frightfully slipshod," said Lynette disapprovingly. "I've no business head," declared Simon cheerfully. "I never had. A fellow tells me to sign, I sign. It's much the simplest way." Andrew Pennington was looking at him thoughtfully. He said dryly, stroking his upper lip, "A little risky sometimes, Doyle." "Nonsense," replied Simon. "I'm not one of those people who believe the whole world is out to do one down. I'm a trusting kind of fellow, and it pays, you know. I've hardly ever been let down." Suddenly, to everyone's surprise, the silent Mr. Fanthorpe swung around and addressed Lynette. "I hope I'm not butting in, but you must let me say how much I admire your business-like capacity. In my profession, I am a lawyer, I find ladies sadly unbusinesslike. Never to sign a document before you read it through is admirable, although admirable." He gave a little bow, then, rather red in the face, he turned once more to contemplate the banks of the Nile. Lynette said rather uncertainly, Thank you." She bit her lip to repress a giggle. The young man had looked so preternaturally solemn. Andrew Pennington looked seriously annoyed. Simon Doyle looked uncertain whether to be annoyed or amused. The backs of Mr. Fanthorpe's ears were bright crimson. "Next, please," said Lynette, smiling up at Pennington. But Pennington was looking decidedly ruffled. "I think perhaps some other time would be better," he said stiffly. "As Doyle says, if you have to read through all these, we shall be here till lunchtime. He mustn't miss enjoying the scenery. Anyway, those first two papers were the only urgent ones. We'll settle down to business later." "It's frightfully hot in here," Lynette said. "Let's go outside." The three of them passed through the swing door. Hercule Poirot turned his head. His gaze rested thoughtfully on Mr. Fanthorpe's back. Then it shifted to the lounging figure of Mr. Fergusson, who had his head thrown back and was still whistling softly to himself. Finally Poirot looked over at the upright figure of Miss Van Schuyler in her corner, Miss Van Schuyler, who was glaring at Mr. Fergusson. The swing door on the porch side opened and Cornelia Robson hurried in. "You've been a long time," snapped the old lady. "Where have you been?" "I'm so sorry, Cousin Marie. The wool wasn't where you said it was. It was in another case altogether." "My dear child, you are perfectly hopeless at finding anything. You are willing, I know, my dear, but you must try to be a little cleverer and quicker. It only needs concentration." "I'm so sorry, Cousin Marie. I'm afraid I am very stupid." Nobody need to be stupid if they try, dear. I have brought you on this trip, and I expected a little attention in return. Cornelia flushed. I'm very sorry, Cousin Marie. And where is Miss Bowers? It was time for my drops 10 minutes ago. Please go and find her at once. The doctor said it was most important. But at this stage Miss Bowers entered, carrying a small medicine glass. Your drops, Miss Van Schuyler? I should have had them at 11, snapped the old lady. If there's one thing I detest, it's unpunctuality. Quite, said Miss Bowers. She glanced at her wristwatch. It's exactly half a minute to 11. But by my watch, it's 10 past. I think you'll find my watch is right. It's the perfect timekeeper. It never loses or gains. Miss Bowers was quite unperturbable. Miss Van Schuyler swallowed the contents of the medicine glass. I feel definitely worse, she snapped. I'm sorry to hear that, Miss Van Schuyler. Miss Bowers did not sound sorry. She sounded completely uninterested. She was obviously making the correct reply mechanically. It's too hot in here, snapped Miss Van Schuyler. Find me a chair on the deck, Miss Bowers. Cornelia, bring me my knitting. Don't be clumsy or drop it, and then I shall want you to unwind up some wool. The procession passed out. Mr. Ferguson sighed, stirred his legs, and remarked to the world at large, Gosh, I'd like to scrag that dame. Perrault asked interestedly, She is a type you dislike, eh? Dislike, I should say so. What good has that woman ever been to anyone or anything? She's never worked or lifted a finger. She just battened on other people. She's a parasite, and a damned unpleasant parasite. There are a lot of people on this boat I'd say the world could do without. Really? Yes, that girl in here just now signing share transfers and throwing her weight around. Hundreds of thousands of wretched workers slaving for a mere pittance to keep her in silk stockings and useless luxuries. One of the richest women in England, so someone told me, and never done a hand's turn in her life. Who told you she was one of the richest women in England? Mr. Ferguson cast a belligerent eye at him. A man you wouldn't be seen speaking to, a man who works with his hands, and isn't ashamed of it. Now one of your dressed up, foppish, good for nothing things. His eye rested unfavorably on the bow tie and pink shirt. Me, I work with my brains, and I am not ashamed of it, said Perrault, answering the glance. Mr. Ferguson merely snorted. Ought to be shot up, and the lot of them, he asserted. My dear young man, said Perrault, what a passion you have for violence. Can you tell me of any good that can be done without it? You've got to break down and destroy before you can build up. It is certainly much easier and much noisier and much more spectacular. What do you do for a living? Nothing at all, I bet. Probably call yourself a middleman. I am not a middleman, I am a top man, declared Hercule Poirot with a slight arrogance. What are you? I am a detective, said Hercule Poirot with a modest air of one who says, I am a king. Good God, the young man seemed seriously taken aback. Do you mean that girl actually totes about a dumdick, as she is careful of her precious skin as that? I have no connection whatsoever with Mr. and Mrs. Doyle, said Perrault stiffly. I am on a holiday. Enjoying a vacation, eh? And you, is it not that you are on a holiday also? Holiday, Mr. Ferguson snorted. Then he added cryptically, I'm studying conditions. Very interesting, murmured Perrault, and moved gently out onto the deck. Miss Van Schuyler was established in the best corner. Cornelia knelt in front of her, her arms outstretched with a skein of gray wool upon them. Miss Bowers was sitting very upright reading the Saturday Evening Post. Perrault wandered gently onward down the starboard deck. As he passed round the stern of the boat, he almost ran into a woman who turned a startled face toward him, a dark, piquant Latin face. She was neatly dressed in black and had been standing talking to a big burly man in a uniform, one of the engineers by the look of him. There was a queer expression on both their faces, guilt and alarm. Perrault wondered what they had been talking about. He rounded the stern and continued his walk along the port side. A cabin door opened and Mrs. Otterborn emerged and nearly fell into his arms. She was wearing a scarlet satin dressing gown. "So sorry," she apologized. "Miss Dear Mr. Perrault, so very sorry. The motion, just the motion, you know, never did have any sea legs. If the boat would only keep still." She clutched at his arm. "It's the pitching I can't stand. Never really happy at sea and left all alone here, hour after hour. That girl of mine, no sympathy, no understanding of her poor old mother, who's done everything for her." Mrs. Otterborn began to weep. "Slaved for her I have, worn myself to the bone, to the bone. A grand amorous, that's what I have been, a grand amorous. Sacrificed everything, everything, and nobody cares. But I'll tell everyone. I'll tell them now how she neglects me, how hard she is making me come on this trip, this journey, bored to death. I'll go and tell them now." She surged forward. Perrault gently repressed the action. "I will send her to you, madame. Re-enter your cabin. It's the best that way." "No, I want to tell everyone on the boat. It's too dangerous, madame. The sea is too rough. You might be swept overboard." Mrs. Otterborn looked at him doubtfully. "You think so? You really think so?" "I do." He was successful. Mrs. Otterburn wavered, faltered, and re-entered her cabin. Perrault's nostrils twitched once or twice, then he nodded and walked on to where Rosalie Otterborn was sitting between Mrs. Allerton and Tim. "Your mother wants you, mademoiselle." She had been laughing quite happily. Now her face clouded over. She shot a quick, suspicious look at him and hurried along the deck. "I can't make that child out," said Mrs. Atterborn. Mrs. Allerton. "She varies so. One day she's friendly, the next day she's positively rude. Thoroughly spoilt and bad-tempered," said Tim, not Mrs. Just Tim. "I'm getting tired, guys. That's why I'm acting like I can't read." "Okay." Mrs. Allerton shook her head. "No, I don't think it's that. I think she's unhappy." Tim shrugged his shoulders. "Oh, well, I suppose we've all got our private troubles." His voice sounded hard and curt. A booming noise was heard. "Lunch!" cried Mrs. Allerton delightedly. "I'm starving." That evening Perrault noticed that Mrs. Allerton was sitting talking to Miss Van Schuyler. As he passed, Mrs. Allerton closed one eye and opened it again. She was saying, "Of course, at Caffrey's castle, the dear Duke." Cornelia, released from attendance, was out on the deck. She was listening to Dr. Bessner, who was instructing her somewhat ponderously in Egyptology, as culled from the pages of Baedeker. Cornelia listened with rapt attention. Leaning over the rail, Miss Tim Allerton was saying, "Anyhow, it's a rotten world." Rosalie Otterborn answered, "It's unfair. Some people have everything." Perrault sighed. He was glad that he was no longer young. And next week we will do chapter 9. And hopefully I will have the rest of my 65th list for the library online for you guys. I'm hoping I have that going by then. And yeah, thank you all for joining me. Thank you, Catherine, on Instagram. I appreciate you being there. And thank you, everyone, on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I really appreciate your time and effort. And I ask that you come back next week and we'll go to chapter 9. So we got 2 chapters in tonight. We're moving right along here. I'm really happy about that. Okay, thank you so much, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye, guys.